The winter of 1878 unleashed the most savage blizzard the Wyoming Territory had ever witnessed. Temperatures plummeted well below zero as relentless winds drove snow in blinding sheets across the unforgiving landscape. It was in these merciless conditions that Sarah Reynolds found herself trapped in a remote cabin, her husband's grave barely covered by the mounting snow, with dwindling firewood and fading hope. As consciousness ebbed and death seemed inevitable, the door to her isolated cabin burst open, revealing the silhouette of a man, Lucas Blackwood, a half-Comanche traveler on a trading mission who had become separated from his companion. What transpired in that frozen outpost would forever alter the course of two lives and challenge the deepest prejudices of an unforgiving frontier town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The howling wind rattled the windows of the small cabin with such force that Sarah Reynolds was certain they would shatter at any moment. 4 days had passed since the last substantial piece of firewood had been consumed by the hungry flames, leaving her with nothing but twigs and kindling that burned too quickly to provide lasting warmth. The cabin's temperature had dropped so low that the water in the bucket by the door had frozen solid. "Just a little longer," Sarah whispered, her chapped lips barely moving as she huddled beneath every blanket she possessed. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, having spoken to no one but herself since the fever had taken Thomas 6 days prior. The storm had begun that same evening, as though nature itself was conspiring to ensure her husband's impromptu burial behind the cabin would be his final resting place. She hadn't even been able to fashion a proper marker before the snow began to fall. The Wyoming Territory had promised them so much: abundant land, independence, a chance to build something meaningful far from the crowded streets of Boston. Thomas had been so certain they would thrive here, away from his domineering father. And the family shipping business he'd refused to join. "We'll make our own legacy," he told her, eyes bright with dreams as they'd headed west on the train last spring. Now those dreams lay buried beneath 3 feet of snow, along with the man who'd imagined them. Sarah's eyes drifted to the calendar tacked to the wall near the small table Thomas had crafted from oak boards. January 12th, 1878. Just 8 months since they'd arrived, full of hope. 6 days since Thomas's death, and likely only hours before she would join him. The irony that she'd survived childbirth only to face death by freezing wasn't lost on her. Her hand instinctively moved to her abdomen, still tender from the traumatic delivery that had come 7 weeks too early. Their son, Daniel Thomas Reynolds, born healthy despite his premature arrival, slept fitfully in the roughly hewn cradle beside her bed. How she had managed to keep him alive these past days was something of a miracle, her body providing milk despite her own deteriorating condition, her arms finding strength to hold him close for precious warmth when everything else felt frozen. To the core. "I'm sorry, little one," she murmured, reaching out to touch his tiny fist. "Your father would have adored you." The baby stirred but didn't wake, his breath forming tiny, visible puffs in the frigid air. Sarah forced herself to stand, ignoring the protest of her weakened limbs. There had to be something else she could burn. The small pile of kindling by the fireplace would last perhaps another hour. After that, she pushed the thought aside. She'd already broken apart one of the 2 chairs that accompanied their table, feeding the splintered pieces to the flames over the past day. The baby's cradle was too precious to consider, and the bed frame was solid oak, impossible to break apart in her condition. Moving to the window, she rubbed a small circle in the frost to peer outside. The snow continued to fall in heavy curtains, obscuring everything beyond a few feet from the cabin. Their nearest neighbors, the Millers, lived 6 miles to the east, an impossible journey even if she'd been at full strength, let alone in Her current state, with an infant, the trading post at Clearwater was 12 miles in the opposite direction, equally unreachable. Sarah had written to her parents in Philadelphia when complications with her pregnancy had first appeared. But even in favorable conditions, mail took weeks to reach the eastern states. By the time anyone received word of their situation, it would be far too late. A sudden gust of wind sent a shower of snow down the chimney, momentarily dousing the feeble flames. Sarah cried out, rushing to salvage the fire, carefully arranging the remaining kindling to coax the embers back to life. As the tiny flames licked upward once more, she sank to her knees on the rough wooden floor. "Please," she whispered, though to whom she was praying she couldn't say. Thomas had been the religious one, not her. "Please, if not for me, then for Daniel." The baby began to cry, his thin wail cutting through the constant howl of the wind. Sarah gathered him into her arms, unbuttoning her dress despite the cold, to offer him what nourishment she could. As he nursed, she hummed softly, a lullaby. Her own mother had sung to her as a child. Outside, the world was white fury and certain death. Inside, for these few precious moments, there existed a fragile cocoon of life, mother and child clinging to each other in defiance of the elements. Miles away across the snow-covered plains, Lucas Blackwood struggled against the relentless storm. At 32 years old, he was accustomed to harsh conditions, having grown up in this territory when it was still largely unclaimed wilderness. But even he recognized the deadly nature of this particular blizzard. "Just a little farther, Thunder," he urged his dark chestnut stallion forward, leaning low over the horse's neck to shield his face from the cutting wind. They'd been traveling for hours, having left Clearwater just after dawn when a trapper had arrived with news of a young couple living in an isolated cabin who might need assistance. The woman had been expecting a child, and with the blizzard raging for days now, the trading post owner had expressed concern. Lucas had set out immediately, essential supplies secured in his saddlebags. Though not a permanent resident of Clearwater, he visited regularly on trading expeditions between settlements, carrying goods and news across the isolated territory. His familiarity with the harsh landscape and weather patterns made him one of the few capable of attempting such a journey in these conditions. Now, with daylight fading and the temperature plummeting further, he was beginning to fear he'd made a fatal miscalculation. His face, a striking blend of his father's Anglo features and his mother's Comanche heritage, was largely hidden beneath a heavy buffalo hide hood. But his dark eyes remained fixed on what he hoped was the correct direction. The landmarks he typically used for navigation had disappeared beneath the snow, and the sun had been obscured by clouds all day. Lucas's father, William Blackwood, had been a respected frontiersman who had traded fairly with the Comanche in the 1840s. There he'd met and fallen in love with Morning Star, the daughter of a respected tribal elder. Their union had scandalized both communities, but William had established a small trading operation serving both settlers and native populations, creating a home where their son could learn the best of both worlds. From his father, Lucas had learned tracking, trading, and negotiation, practical skills that helped him bridge different communities. From his mother, he'd learned the ancient pathways across the plains, the reading of weather patterns and survival techniques passed down through generations. Both his parents were gone now, his father from a riding accident 8 years ago, his mother from smallpox shortly thereafter. Lucas had continued the family trading business, expanding his roots and building a reputation as a fair dealer willing to travel anywhere goods were needed, regardless of the customer's race or standing. It was a dangerous way to live in a region still fraught with tension between settlers and native tribes, but Lucas had never felt fully at home in either world. The space between was where he existed most comfortably. Thunder suddenly nickered, and jerked his head upward, pulling Lucas from his thoughts. The horse had sensed something. Lucas strained his eyes against the swirling snow, catching the faintest hint of darker shapes ahead. As they drew closer, relief flooded through him. A cabin, half buried in snowdrifts but unmistakably human shelter. "Good boy," he murmured to Thunder, patting the horse's frost-covered neck. "You've found it." As they approached, Lucas noted with growing concern the absence of smoke from the chimney. In these temperatures, no one would allow their fire to die. Unless, he urged Thunder forward with greater urgency, circling the small structure once. A crude wooden cross poked through the snow behind the cabin, confirming his fears that death had already visited this place. Dismounting quickly, Lucas secured Thunder beneath a small lean-to attached to the cabin, offering what little protection it provided from the elements. He grabbed essential supplies from his saddlebags and made his way to the front door, his legs sinking deep into the snow with each step. He knocked firmly, calling out, "Hello inside, Lucas Blackwood from Clearwater. Anyone there?" When no response came, he knocked again, louder this time. "Is anyone there? I've come to help." After another moment of silence, Lucas tested the door latch. It was unlocked but frozen in place. He put his shoulder against the rough-hewn wood and pushed hard, breaking through the ice that had sealed it shut. The door swung inward with a groan of protest. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit by the faintest glow of dying embers in the fireplace. As his eyes adjusted to the gloom, Lucas made out a figure huddled near the hearth, a woman clutching something to her chest. For a terrible moment, he thought he'd arrived too late. Then he saw the slight rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed. "Mom," he called softly, moving toward her. "I'm Lucas Blackwood. I've come to help." Sarah's head jerked up at the sound of a voice, a real voice, not the wind's howl or her own desperate murmurings. Through the haze of exhaustion and cold, she registered a tall figure standing in her doorway, bringing with him a swirl of snow and a draught of frigid air. "Close the door," she managed to rasp, instinctively turning to shield the baby from the cold. Lucas quickly pushed the door shut behind him, securing the latch, then hurried to where Sarah knelt. The fire was nearly out, and the temperature inside the cabin couldn't have been much higher than outside. Death by freezing was minutes, not hours away. "I'm Lucas Blackwood," he said, setting his supplies on the floor. "I've come from Clearwater. How long has the fire been this low?" Sarah stared up at him, trying to process the sudden appearance of another human being after days of solitude and encroaching death. "Hours," she finally answered. "No wood left." Her eyes drifted to the bundle. In her arms. "My baby, please help my baby." Lucas's survival instincts took over. "First, we need heat," he said firmly. He glanced around the cabin quickly, assessing his options. "Is there anything left to burn? Furniture? Books?" The chair, Sarah nodded toward the splintered remains of what had once been a dining chair. "Already used one. Nothing else I could break." Without hesitation, Lucas moved to the small table, flipping it onto its side and delivering a powerful kick to one of the legs. The wood cracked but didn't break. He kicked again harder and was rewarded with a satisfying snap as the leg broke. "Free, this will do for now," he said, quickly breaking the table leg into smaller pieces and carefully arranging them over the embers. He bent close, blowing gently until tiny flames began to lick upward. "I have more supplies on my horse. Once this catches properly, I'll bring them in." As the flames grew stronger, Lucas turned his attention to Sarah and the infant. Even in the dim light, he could see that both were dangerously cold. The woman's lips had a bluish tinge, and her face was frighteningly pale. "May I?" he asked, reaching toward the baby. Sarah hesitated, then nodded, allowing this stranger to carefully take Daniel from her arms. Lucas unwrapped the blanket just enough to place 2 fingers against the infant's chest, counting the heartbeats. "His heart rate is slow but steady," Lucas reported, rewrapping the tiny boy securely. How old is he? 6 days, Sarah whispered. Born during the storm. Lucas's eyebrows rose in surprise. You delivered him yourself? Sarah shook her head slightly. My husband helped. Then the fever took him. Her voice broke. I buried him out back. Understanding dawned in Lucas's eyes as he recalled the snow-covered cross. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly, with genuine compassion in his voice. He gently placed the baby back in Sarah's arms. What's your name? Sarah Reynolds, she replied. My son is Daniel. Mrs. Reynolds, Daniel needs warmth immediately, as do you, Lucas said, his tone gentle but urgent. I'm going to bring in more supplies from my horse. Then I'll need to check both of you more thoroughly. Is that all right? Sarah nodded weakly, too exhausted to do anything but trust this unexpected savior. As Lucas moved back toward the door, she called after him, Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming. Just doing what anyone would, Mrs. Reynolds, he replied with a slight nod. Try to stay awake until I return. Outside, the storm continued unabated, but Lucas moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving his bedroll, extra blankets, and a small sack of emergency provisions from Thunder's saddlebags. The stallion had been well trained to endure harsh conditions, but even he would need better shelter soon. When Lucas re-entered the cabin, he found Sarah struggling to remain conscious, her head drooping forward over the baby. He quickly closed the door against the howling wind and moved to her side, setting down his supplies. Mrs. Reynolds, he said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder, Sarah, I need you to stay with me. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on his face with effort. For the first time, she truly saw the man who had appeared like an answered prayer. His features were striking, high cheekbones and copper-toned skin speaking to his native heritage, while the shape of his nose and jaw suggested European ancestry. His long black hair was pulled back from his face, revealing intelligent dark eyes that assessed her condition with concern. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You're Indian, she murmured, the observation slipping out before she could stop it. Half, Lucas replied matter-of-factly, used to such reactions. My father was a trader, my mother Comanche. Now let me help you to the bed where you'll be more comfortable. Without waiting for a response, he gently lifted Sarah, baby and all, into his arms and carried them to the small bed against the far wall. He arranged his own thick bedroll over the existing blankets, creating a nest of warmth. I'm going to examine the baby first, Lucas explained, taking Daniel carefully. Then you. As the fire began to burn more steadily, casting a warm glow throughout the cabin, Lucas conducted a thorough examination of the newborn. Despite his premature arrival and the harsh conditions, Daniel appeared remarkably resilient, cold, but not dangerously so, somewhat underweight but with good muscle tone and reflexes. He's stronger than he looks, Lucas commented, a note of admiration in his voice. You've done well keeping him alive, Mrs. Reynolds. Sarah, she corrected softly. Please call me Sarah. Lucas nodded, rewrapping the baby and placing him in a small depression in the blankets next to his mother. Sarah, then, I need to examine you now. With efficient yet respectful movements, Lucas checked her pulse, breathing, and temperature. His hands gently probed her abdomen, checking for complications from the recent birth. Sarah winced slightly, but didn't protest. You're suffering from exhaustion and the early stages of hypothermia, he diagnosed. And there's some inflammation. That concerns me. Have you been in pain? Some, Sarah admitted. But I couldn't think about that. Daniel needed me. Lucas nodded, understanding her priorities. You need rest, warmth, and nourishment. I'll prepare something for you to eat, and I have medicines that will help with the inflammation. He moved, to the fireplace, adding more of the broken table to the flames before retrieving a small pot from his supplies. He filled it with clean snow from just outside the door, set it to melt over the fire, and added dried meat and herbs from his provisions. As he worked, Sarah watched him through half-closed eyes. "How did you find us?" she asked. "No one even knows we're out here except the Millers, and they're miles away. A trapper stopped at Clearwater this morning," Lucas explained, stirring the makeshift stew. "Said he'd passed this way before the worst of the storm hit and remembered a young couple had settled here. With the blizzard lasting so long, Jack Porter, he owns the trading post, was concerned. Asked if I'd check on you when I mentioned I was heading this direction. You were traveling in this?" Sarah asked incredulously, gesturing toward the window where snow continued to beat against the glass. Lucas's mouth curved in a slight smile. "I was returning from Fort Laramie to the south, had goods to deliver before heading north again." "You traveled between settlements? In winter?" The questions slipped out as Sarah tried to comprehend the kind of man who would willingly face such conditions regularly. "It's what I do," Lucas replied simply. "My father established trading routes throughout this territory. I've maintained and expanded them over the years. And you trade with Indians too?" The observation wasn't quite a question, but Sarah's tone revealed her uncertainty about this aspect of his work. "I trade with people, Mrs. Reynolds." "Sarah," Lucas corrected himself. "Commerce doesn't discriminate based on race, and neither do I." There was no reproach in his tone, just a simple statement of fact. Sarah found herself studying him with new interest as he continued preparing the stew. His movements were assured and economical, nothing wasted. Despite his frontier clothing, buckskins beneath a heavy wool coat, there was an undeniable air of intelligence and capability about him. The stew began to simmer, filling the cabin with a savory aroma that made Sarah realize how long it had been since she'd eaten properly. Her stomach growled audibly, prompting a small smile from Lucas. "Almost ready," he assured her. "It's simple but nutritious." As he ladled the hot stew into a cup and brought it to her bedside, Daniel began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching as he prepared to cry. "He's hungry," Sarah explained, shifting to take him into her arms. Lucas nodded, discreetly turning away to give her privacy as she prepared to nurse the infant. "The stew will help with your milk production," he said, his back still turned, "and I have herbs that can increase it further if necessary." "Thank you," Sarah said softly, the simple words encompassing far more than gratitude for the meal or the medicinal knowledge. "We would have died tonight if you hadn't come." Lucas turned back to face her, his expression solemn. "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." But they both knew that wasn't true. Few men would have ventured out in such conditions, risking their own lives for strangers who might already be beyond help. Fewer still would have known how to save them if they'd tried. As the storm raged on outside, the small cabin grew gradually warmer. Lucas continued to feed the fire with pieces of the dismantled table, knowing they would need to find a more sustainable solution if the blizzard didn't abate soon. He prepared herbal tea using ingredients from his supplies, encouraging Sarah to drink it to reduce inflammation and restore her strength. Night fell, turning the windows into black mirrors that reflected the scene within. A woman and her newborn child, saved from certain death by the unexpected arrival of a man who walked between two worlds. Neither could have predicted how their lives would intertwine beyond this night, or how the residents of Clearwater would react when they learned of the arrangement that necessity had forced upon them. "Why did you become a trader?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. She sat propped against the wall on her bed, Daniel sleeping peacefully beside her after nursing. Lucas looked up from where he was carefully sorting through the supplies he'd brought, creating neat piles of essentials. It wasn't so much a choice as a continuation, he replied thoughtfully. My father established roots throughout this territory when it was still largely unmapped. I grew up watching him negotiate between worlds that rarely understood each other. And you felt comfortable in both? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this man whose arrival had defied all probability. Neither, sometimes, Lucas admitted with unexpected candor. The white settlements see me as Indian first. The Comanche and other tribes recognize my mother's blood, but know I wasn't raised within their traditions. I exist in the spaces between. His matter-of-fact assessment held no self-pity, just a clear-eyed view of his position within the complex tapestry of frontier society. Sarah found herself contemplating her own narrow understanding of such realities before her journey west. Tomorrow, I'll need to find more substantial wood, Lucas continued, shifting to practical concerns. The storm shows signs of weakening overnight. If I can reach the stand of pines about half a mile east, I can bring back enough fuel to last several days. Is it safe to venture out? Sarah asked, concern evident in her voice, despite having known this man for only hours. Safer than freezing, Lucas replied with a slight smile. I've navigated worse conditions. Outside, the wind howled with diminished fury, still dangerous, but no longer at the peak intensity that had threatened to tear the cabin apart earlier. Inside, the fragile warmth created by the revived fire and shared humanity formed a barrier against the deadly cold. May I ask about your husband? Lucas inquired carefully, adding another piece of wood to the flames. Sarah's throat tightened at the question, grief still raw and immediate. Thomas was a dreamer, she said finally, the second son of a Boston shipping family. His older brother was groomed to take over the business, while Thomas was expected to study law. But he always wanted something different, to build with. His hands to own land, to live by his own rules. Lucas nodded, recognizing the familiar story of younger sons seeking their own path beyond predetermined family roles. We met at a literary society meeting, Sarah continued, finding unexpected comfort in sharing her memories. I was teaching at a girls' school, the daughter of a professor. My parents were disappointed when I chose Thomas over the headmistress position I'd been offered. Her expression softened with remembrance. Thomas was so passionate about the West. He'd read everything he could find about the territories, talked endlessly about the opportunities for those willing to work hard. When we married last spring, his family essentially disowned him for choosing me over the match they'd arranged with a banker's daughter. And now you're alone, far from everything familiar, Lucas observed quietly. Not entirely alone, Sarah replied, glancing at her sleeping son. Daniel has given me reason to continue when I might otherwise have surrendered. Lucas studied her with newfound respect. Many women of her background would have completely collapsed under the combined weight of childbirth, widowhood, and survival. In such harsh conditions, yet she had found the strength to keep herself and her child alive against overwhelming odds. You should rest, he suggested, noting how her eyelids had begun to droop despite her efforts to remain alert. I'll keep watch and tend the fire. But you've traveled all day in the storm, Sarah protested weakly. You must be exhausted too. I'm accustomed to irregular sleep, Lucas assured her. It's part of life on the trading routes. Rest now. Both of you need to recover your strength. Unable to resist the pull of exhaustion any longer, Sarah surrendered to sleep, comforted by the knowledge that they were no longer alone in their struggle against the elements. Throughout the night, Lucas maintained his vigil, regularly checking on his charges and ensuring the fire remained strong. Outside, the blizzard continued, though with gradually diminishing intensity. Wind still howled around the cabin's corners, driving snow into drifts that reached the windowsills. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Sarah and Daniel slept soundly, Lucas took stock of their situation. The storm showed signs of abating, but their supply of firewood, even with what he'd salvaged from the furniture, would last perhaps another day at most. Food was limited to what he'd brought in his saddlebags, enough for a few days, if carefully rationed. More concerning was Sarah's condition. While the immediate danger of hypothermia had passed, the inflammation from childbirth worried him. He had herbal remedies that would help, but full recovery would require time and continued care. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the snow-covered windows, Lucas made a decision. They couldn't remain in the cabin indefinitely with dwindling supplies, but attempting to travel to Clearwater in these conditions would be equally dangerous, especially with a weakened woman and newborn infant. He would need to secure more firewood and possibly hunt for additional food while continuing to treat Sarah's emerging infection. If the storm broke within the next few days, they might attempt the journey to town. If not, they would need to create a more sustainable situation here. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound from the bed. Sarah was stirring, and Daniel had begun to make the small movements that preceded waking. Lucas moved to check on them, his supplies ready. "Good morning," he said quietly, as Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "How are you feeling?" Sarah took a moment to assess herself. The bone-deep chill that had pervaded her body was gone, replaced by the warmth of blankets and the renewed fire. The ache in her abdomen remained, but seemed less intense than before. Most significantly, the fog of despair that had enveloped her for days had lifted, replaced by a cautious hope. "Better," she replied, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "Much better, thanks to you." Lucas nodded, pleased with the improvement. "May I examine you again? I'm concerned about potential infection." Sarah agreed, and Lucas's careful examination confirmed his suspicions. The inflammation had progressed slightly, though the herbal remedies had slowed its advancement. "I'll prepare stronger medicine," he decided, returning to his supplies, "and will need to continue treatment regularly throughout the day." As he worked, Sarah attended to Daniel, who had awakened fully and was demanding his breakfast with increasingly insistent cries. Lucas discreetly busied himself at the fireplace while she nursed the infant, maintaining a respectful distance that Sarah appreciated. "The storm has weakened," she observed, listening to the wind that continued to buffet the cabin, though with less violence than before. "Yes," Lucas confirmed, "and our situation here is challenging. The woodpile is nearly depleted, and supplies are limited." The pragmatic assessment didn't sugarcoat their predicament, yet his tone conveyed competence rather than alarm. He had clearly faced difficult situations before and found ways to overcome them. "What do you suggest?" Sarah asked, shifting Daniel to her shoulder to burp him. "I need to secure more firewood today," Lucas replied, bringing her a cup of freshly brewed medicinal tea. "There are trees not far from the cabin. I noticed them when I arrived. With my axe I can fell at least one and break it down for burning." "In this weather?" Sarah questioned, concerned. "Is that safe?" "Safer than freezing," Lucas pointed out with a slight smile. "I've worked in worse conditions. The cabin's lean-to, where thunder is sheltered, was likely meant for a woodpile originally. If I can fill it today, we'll have enough fuel to last until the storm breaks." His confidence was reassuring, but Sarah couldn't help worrying. If something happened to him while he was outside gathering wood, she and Daniel would once again face the prospect of freezing to death, a fate only temporarily postponed by his arrival. "I'll be careful," Lucas promised, reading her concern, "and I won't go far from the cabin." After ensuring that Sarah and Daniel were comfortable and that the fire was well stocked for the immediate future, Lucas prepared to venture into the storm. He donned his heavy buffalo coat and fur-lined gloves, securing his axe and a length of rope to drag the cut wood back to the cabin. "I'll return as quickly as possible," he assured Sarah, who watched anxiously from the bed, Daniel cradled against her chest. Continue taking the medicine every 2 hours and try to rest. With that, he stepped out into the swirling snow, momentarily disappearing from view as the door swung shut behind him. Alone again in the cabin, but with renewed hope, Sarah gazed down at her son's face. "He'll come back," she whispered, as much to reassure herself as to promise the infant. "He'll come back, and we'll survive this together." The hours crept by with agonizing slowness as Sarah waited for Lucas's return. Daniel had fallen asleep. After nursing, his tiny features peaceful despite the threatening world outside. She had managed to take the medicine as instructed and even consumed a small portion of the remaining stew, but worry gnawed at her with each passing minute. When the cabin door finally burst open, admitting a swirl of snow and a frost-covered figure, Sarah nearly cried with relief. Lucas stomped the snow from his boots and quickly secured the door behind him, his breath visible in the chilled air. "You're back," she said, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. Lucas nodded, shedding his ice-encrusted outer garments. "With success," he replied, moving to warm himself by the fire. "There's a good stack of wood under the lean-to now, enough to last several days." "You're freezing," Sarah observed, noting his reddened face and stiff movements. "It's colder than yesterday," he acknowledged, holding his hands toward the flames, "but manageable with proper preparation." Despite his matter-of-fact tone, Sarah could see that the excursion had taken its toll. His normally fluid movements were hampered by cold, stiffened muscles, and weariness showed in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been present before. "You should rest," she suggested. "You've been caring for us since you arrived without taking proper rest yourself." Lucas shook his head slightly. "I need to check your condition first and prepare more medicine. Then I'll consider resting." His dedication to their welfare before his own comfort spoke volumes about the man's character. As he examined her with a blend of efficiency and respect, Sarah found herself studying his face more closely than she had previously permitted herself. The strong line of his jaw, the intelligent dark eyes focused intently on his work, the slight furrow between his brows as he assessed her condition, all painted a portrait of concentration and care. "The inflammation is responding to the treatment," he reported finally, his expression lightening somewhat. "The fever hasn't progressed, which is an excellent sign." "Thanks to your medicines," Sarah acknowledged. "And your own strength," Lucas countered, repacking his supplies. "Many women would have succumbed days ago, especially after childbirth and losing a husband." The matter-of-fact assessment of what she had endured made Sarah realize just how close she and Daniel had come to death. "I couldn't give up," she said simply. "Daniel needed me." Lucas nodded, understanding the powerful drive of maternal protection. He'd seen it countless times during his travels. Women drawing on reserves of strength they never knew they possessed when their children's welfare was at stake. "You should eat," Sarah insisted, noting that he had tended to their needs without addressing his own, "and then rest. I'm feeling much stronger now." After some persuasion, Lucas agreed to consume a portion of the stew he had prepared earlier, and to take a brief rest. Sarah watched as he arranged his bedroll near the fire, maintaining a respectful distance from the bed she occupied with Daniel. "Wake me if the baby needs anything or if you feel any change in your condition," he instructed, stretching his tall frame on the floor. "I will," Sarah promised. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed him, his breathing deepening into the regular rhythm of sleep. Only then did Sarah allow herself to fully acknowledge how profoundly this stranger had altered their fate. Without his arrival, she and Daniel would certainly have perished, either from the cold as the fire died or from the infection that had been quietly taking hold in her body. But Lucas Blackwood was far more than simply a timely rescuer. In the brief span of their acquaintance, he had demonstrated a rare combination of practical skill and compassionate care. His ability to navigate the deadly storm, to treat medical conditions with limited resources, to secure essential firewood despite the brutal conditions, all spoke to a man of exceptional capability. Yet it was his manner that had perhaps impressed her most, the quiet confidence that never veered into arrogance, the respect with which he treated her despite her vulnerable state, the gentle hands that could wield an axe against timber one moment and cradle a newborn infant the next. As Daniel stirred beside her, Sarah found herself wondering what Thomas would have thought of the man who had saved his wife and son. Thomas had been open-minded by Boston standards, willing to challenge his family's rigid social expectations to marry the woman he loved. But the frontier had a way of testing even the most progressive attitudes, especially regarding relations between whites and Indians. The man sleeping by their fire defied easy categorization. Trader, frontiersman, healer. These labels only captured fragments of who Lucas Blackwood was, the son of a white trader and a Comanche woman, educated in the ways of both worlds, yet belonging fully to neither, moving between cultures with a grace born of necessity rather than choice. Daniel began to fuss in earnest, pulling Sarah from her reflections. She soothed him with soft words and gentle touches, careful not to wake Lucas, whose exhaustion was evident in the depth of his slumber. As she tended to her son's needs, Sarah was struck by how much stronger she felt compared to just a day earlier. The combination of Lucas's medicines, proper nourishment, and restored warmth had pulled her back from the edge of death with remarkable speed. Outside, the storm continued, though with diminishing force, a constant reminder of the precarious nature of their situation. Yet within the cabin's walls, a fragile sense of security had been established. They had heat, some food, medicines, and most importantly, each other. No longer was Sarah facing the impossible odds alone. Now she had an ally in the struggle for survival, a partnership forged in crisis, but already demonstrating a depth of understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. As Sarah looked from her sleeping son to the man whose arrival had defied all probability, she felt something she had not experienced since Thomas's death: hope for a future beyond mere survival. The day progressed with Lucas and Sarah falling into a natural rhythm of cooperation. When he awoke, refreshed and immediately alert in the way of those accustomed to frontier dangers, Lucas set about reinforcing the cabin's defenses against the cold. He discovered small gaps in the wall timbers where drafts penetrated and sealed. In them, with a mixture of mud and grass, he formulated from materials at hand. Sarah, growing stronger by the hour, insisted on contributing to their shared welfare. Though still weak from her ordeal, she took charge of preparing a more substantial meal from their limited supplies, combining Lucas's provisions with the few remaining stores she had managed to preserve. "Where did you learn about herbal medicines?" she asked as they shared the simple but nourishing stew she had created. "My mother," Lucas replied, appreciation evident in his tone. "She was known among her people for healing knowledge. When I was a boy, she would take me gathering, teaching me to identify plants by their appearance, smell, even the sound of their leaves in the wind." "The sound?" Sarah asked, intrigued. Lucas smiled slightly. "She believed every living thing speaks if you learn to listen properly. Different plants make different sounds when air moves through them. Once you learn their voices, you can find them even in darkness." This perspective on the natural world was unlike anything Sarah had encountered in her Eastern upbringing, where nature was something to be conquered or cultivated rather than communed with. Yet there was an undeniable wisdom in this approach that spoke to her innate curiosity. "And these plants work as well as a doctor's medicines?" she asked, genuinely interested rather than skeptical. "Sometimes better," Lucas answered. The Comanche were treating infections and wounds successfully for generations before white doctors arrived with their bleeding bowls and mercury compounds. The subtle critique of Western medical practices wasn't lost on Sarah, who had witnessed firsthand the often dubious treatments administered by Boston physicians. Her own mother had nearly died under the care of a prestigious doctor whose primary treatment involved bloodletting for a condition that clearly required strengthening, rather than weakening the patient. "Could you teach me some of these remedies?" she asked impulsively. "For Daniel's sake, I should know how to treat common ailments, especially so far from town." Lucas looked momentarily surprised by the request, then nodded with approval. "That would be wise. The frontier is unforgiving to those without such knowledge. When you're stronger, we can begin with the basics: fever reduction, wound treatment, remedies for croup and colic that might help Daniel as he grows." The conversation flowed easily between them as the day progressed, moving from practical matters of survival to more personal exchanges. Sarah learned that Lucas maintained a small cabin near Clearwater, where he stored trade goods between journeys, though he spent more time on the trail than within its walls. In turn, she shared stories of her teaching days in Boston, the bright young women she had mentored, and her hopes that frontier settlements would eventually prioritize education. As dusk approached, bringing with it a noticeable lull in the storm's intensity, Lucas prepared for another excursion outside, this time to check on thunder and assess the weather conditions. When he returned, his expression was cautiously optimistic. "The worst has passed," he announced, shaking snow from his coat. "Stars are visible to the west, which means clearer weather is approaching. By tomorrow, we might see sunshine for the first time in days." "Does that mean we could travel to Clearwater soon?" Sarah asked, uncertain whether to feel relief or apprehension at the prospect. "Not immediately," Lucas cautioned. "The snow is still deep, and you need more time to recover. But perhaps in 3 or 4 days, if your strength continues to improve and the weather holds." The mention of Clearwater and potential departure from their isolated sanctuary brought a sudden awareness of complications that their survival partnership had temporarily suspended. In town, the social boundaries between them would reassert themselves with all the rigid expectations of frontier society. Their easy companionship, forged in crisis, would necessarily transform into something more formal, more distant. That reality hung unspoken between them as they prepared for another night in the cabin, its significance acknowledged in their mutual silence on the subject. For now, they focused on the immediate challenges of survival, maintaining warmth, conserving supplies, managing Sarah's recovery, and caring for Daniel's needs. As night settled over the snow-covered landscape, their world contracted once again to the circle of firelight within the cabin walls. Outside, the storm's final whispers faded into the vast silence of a winter night on the frontier. Inside, 2 people from vastly different worlds continued their unlikely alliance against the elements, neither fully acknowledging how significantly their brief intersection had already altered the course of both their lives. The morning of the 3rd day dawned with remarkable clarity. Sunlight streamed through the frost-covered windows, casting prism-like rainbows across the cabin floor. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts that glittered like diamond fields under the winter sun. Sarah woke to find Lucas already active, melting snow for fresh water and tending to the fire. Daniel had slept through most of the night, waking only twice for feeding, a welcome improvement that suggested the infant was growing stronger despite his challenging start in life. "Good morning," Lucas greeted her, noting her improved color and more alert expression. "The weather has broken. We've survived the worst." Something in his simple statement carried deeper meaning. They hadn't merely endured the physical storm, but had weathered a crisis that had stripped away pretense and forced immediate trust between strangers. In 3 days, they had developed an understanding that might otherwise have taken months, if it had formed at all under normal circumstances. "How are you feeling?" he asked, bringing her a cup of hot tea steeped with honey from his supplies. "Stronger," Sarah replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "The pain has lessened considerably." Lucas nodded with satisfaction. "Your body is healing well. The infection is receding." He glanced toward the window. "I need to check our surroundings now that visibility has improved. There may be game nearby. Fresh meat would help restore your strength more quickly." "You hunt as well as trade?" Sarah asked, adjusting her position to nurse Daniel, who had awakened with his own demands for breakfast. "Every traveler in this own territory must know how to hunt, or they won't remain a traveler for long," Lucas replied with a hint of dry humor. "The trading routes between settlements can take weeks to traverse. Supplies carried from town only stretch so far." He began preparing for the excursion, checking his rifle and gathering ammunition from his saddlebags. His movements were precise and economical, revealing long practice in frontier self-sufficiency. "Will you go far?" Sarah asked, unable to completely mask her concern. "Not today," Lucas assured her. "The snow is too deep for extended travel. I'll stay within sight of the cabin and be back before midday." After ensuring Sarah and Daniel had everything they needed for a few hours alone, Lucas departed, moving with surprising speed through the knee-deep snow. Sarah watched through the window as his tall figure grew smaller against the vast white landscape, an unexpected pang of loneliness touching her despite having spent days in solitude before his arrival. The cabin felt different in his absence, quieter yet somehow emptier. Sarah used the time to attend to personal needs that propriety had limited while sharing the small space. She washed herself as thoroughly as possible with warmed water, changed into the cleanest garments she could find, and arranged her hair more neatly than she had bothered with since Thomas's death. These simple acts of self-care restored some sense of normalcy, a reminder that she was not merely surviving, but beginning to live again. As she moved about the cabin, she found herself studying the small details of their temporary home with new interest. The craftsmanship in the hand-hewn logs, the careful placement of the small window to capture maximum light, the practical layout that made efficient use of limited space. Thomas had built this shelter with more skill than she had fully appreciated. His dreams of creating a homestead worthy of their future together had been cut short, but he had succeeded in providing a haven that had protected his wife and son through nature's worst assault. Sarah's reflections were interrupted by Daniel's cries. As she tended to him, she found herself speaking aloud, sharing thoughts and memories in a one-sided conversation that nonetheless eased her sense of isolation. "Your father would be so proud of you," she told the infant as she changed the cloth that served as his diaper. "You have his chin, I think, and perhaps his determination. He never gave up easily, even when others thought his dreams were impossible." Daniel gazed at her with unfocused eyes, his tiny hand grasping her finger with surprising strength. "And now we have a new friend," she continued softly. "A most unexpected one. Mr. Blackwood is unlike anyone I've ever known in Boston. I wonder what your grandparents would think of him." The thought of her parents' likely reaction to Lucas brought a wry smile to her face. They considered themselves progressive intellectuals, supportive of abolition and education for women, but their notion of appropriate social connections remained firmly within the boundaries of established Boston society. A half-Comanche trader would test even their liberal sentiments. The sound of boots stomping snow from the porch pulled Sarah from her thoughts. Lucas returned carrying a cleaned and dressed rabbit, a modest but welcome addition to their dwindling food supplies. "The hunting was better than I expected," he announced, holding up his prize. "There's a warren not far from here. With snares set, we could have fresh meat daily until we're ready to travel." The practical success of his expedition and the prospect of improved meals lifted Sarah's spirits further. "Can I help prepare it?" she offered. Eager to contribute more actively to their partnership, Lucas assessed her condition with a considering glance. "If you feel strong enough, it would be good for you to move about more." Together, they worked at the small table, Lucas demonstrating the most efficient way to cut the lean meat into portions suitable for stewing. It was the first time they had worked side by side at a task, and Sarah found herself acutely aware of his proximity. His hands moved with practiced precision, the knife seeming like a natural extension of his fingers. "Your mother taught you about plants," Sarah observed as they worked. "Who taught you hunting and trading?" "My father, primarily," Lucas replied, his expression softening with memory. "William Blackwood was known throughout the territory as a fair dealer. He spoke 3 Indian languages fluently and respected tribal customs in all his dealings. The Comanche called him straight-tongue because his words never twisted between English and their language." Pride was evident in Lucas's voice, the son's admiration for his father's integrity in a time and place where such qualities were often sacrificed for expedience or profit. "He must have been an unusual man," Sarah commented, "to build such connections across such different worlds." "He was," Lucas acknowledged, "though he paid a high price for his choices. His own family in St. Louis disowned him when he married my mother. They couldn't accept a Comanche daughter-in-law, even though her father was a respected leader among his people." The personal cost of defying social boundaries resonated with Sarah's own experience. Thomas's family was similar, she shared. They had arranged a match with a shipping magnate's daughter that would have strengthened their business connections. When he chose me instead, a professor's daughter with education but no fortune, they cut him off without a penny. "And yet he didn't regret his choice?" Lucas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Never," Sarah confirmed. "Not even when we were facing the hardest times. He used to say that true wealth couldn't be measured in banknotes." A companionable silence fell between them as they completed their task, the shared understanding of choosing personal integrity over social acceptance, creating yet another unexpected connection as the rabbit stew simmered over the fire, filling the cabin with its savory aroma. Lucas surprised Sarah by retrieving a small leather pouch from his saddlebags. From it, he withdrew a set of intricately carved wooden pieces that she recognized as checkers. "I thought you might welcome some diversion," he explained, setting up the pieces on a small board etched into the leather pouch itself. "The mind needs exercise during recovery as much as the body." The thoughtful gesture touched Sarah deeply. It had been months since she'd engaged in any form of recreation or intellectual stimulation beyond basic survival. The simple game represented a return to normalcy that she hadn't realized she craved. "Did you carve these yourself?" she asked, admiring the craftsmanship of the pieces. Lucas nodded. "During long evenings on the trail. Idle hands invite trouble, my father used to say. Better to keep them busy with something useful or beautiful." "They're both," Sarah observed, genuinely impressed with the artistic quality of the simple game pieces. They played several matches as the stew cooked, Sarah discovering that her academic background provided little advantage against Lucas's strategic thinking. His approach to the game revealed a mind that could see several moves ahead, anticipating consequences and planning accordingly, qualities that had likely served him well on the dangerous frontier. "You said your father spoke 3 Indian languages," Sarah recalled as they reset the board. "Do you speak them as well?" "Comanche fluently," Lucas confirmed. "Enough Sioux and Cheyenne to trade and avoid offense. Languages open doors that might otherwise remain closed." "Would you teach me a few words?" Sarah asked impulsively. "Just basic greetings, perhaps. If we're to live in this territory, Daniel and I should understand something of its original people." Lucas appeared momentarily surprised by the request, then nodded with evident approval. Maruawe means hello in Comanche. Hatu, thank you. Ura, yes. Ka, no. Sarah repeated each word carefully, trying to capture the unfamiliar sounds. Lucas corrected her pronunciation gently, his expression warming as she persisted until she could reproduce each word accurately. "Why is language learning important to you?" he asked, genuinely curious about this aspect of her character. Sarah considered the question thoughtfully. "Words shape how we understand the world," she replied. "When we learn another language, we glimpse how differently others might see the same reality. My father taught ancient Greek and Latin, and he always said that each new language adds another window to your house of understanding. Your father sounds like a wise man," Lucas observed. "He is," Sarah agreed, though limited in some ways. "He values ideas profoundly, but has little patience for practical matters. My mother manages everything in their household. Without her, I doubt he'd remember to eat regularly." The conversation flowed easily between them as they shared the rabbit stew, moving from personal memories to broader topics. Lucas described the changes he'd witnessed across the territory over the past decade. New settlements pushing farther west, shifting relationships between tribes and the government, the gradual transition from lawless frontier to structured communities with their own hierarchies and expectations. Sarah, in turn, shared her observations about differences between Eastern and Western attitudes toward women's roles, noting with irony that while frontier women often performed work that would scandalize Boston society, they simultaneously had fewer opportunities for formal education or independent careers. As evening approached, Lucas checked on Thunder, ensuring the stallion was comfortably settled with adequate feed and unfrozen water. Upon returning, he found Sarah standing at the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky visible now that the clouds had cleared. "The stars seem so much brighter here than in Boston," she remarked as he joined her. "Closer somehow. The Comanche believe stars are the campfires of spirits who have gone before us," Lucas said quietly. "My mother's people navigate by them, read seasons from their movements, find meaning in their patterns." "And what do you believe?" Sarah asked, turning to study his face in the firelight. Lucas considered the question with the thoughtfulness she had come to expect from him. "I believe there is wisdom in both ways of seeing," he answered finally. "Scientific understanding of celestial bodies doesn't diminish the beauty of thinking our ancestors watch over us from above." Truth has many layers. His ability to integrate seemingly opposing worldviews without diminishing either fascinated Sarah. In her experience, people tended to champion one perspective while dismissing others: science over spirituality, civilization over nature, progress over tradition. Lucas seemed to have found a balance that honored multiple truths simultaneously. "The Comanche have a constellation they call the Buffalo," he continued, pointing toward the window. "Where white astronomers see Taurus, they see the great beast that sustained their people for generations. Different names for the same stars, different stories written across the same sky." "Will you show me?" Sarah asked, genuinely interested. "In this alternative mapping of the heavens." Lucas hesitated, then gestured toward the door. "We could step outside briefly. The air is still and the stars are clearest in the first hours after sunset." The suggestion of venturing beyond the cabin's safety gave Sarah pause, but curiosity overcame caution. "Just for a moment," she agreed. Reaching for her shawl, Lucas helped her wrap a heavy blanket over her shoulders before opening the door to the crisp night air. The cold was immediate and bracing, but without the vicious wind that had made it deadly days earlier. The snow had crusted over, glittering in the moonlight like a vast field of diamonds. Standing on the small porch, Sarah gasped at the celestial display above them. Without the haze of city smoke or storm clouds, the night sky revealed itself in spectacular clarity. Thousands of stars scattered across the inky blackness. The Milky Way, a luminous river flowing horizon to horizon. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her words forming visible puffs in the frigid air. "There," Lucas said quietly, standing close behind her to direct her gaze with an outstretched arm. "Those stars form the buffalo's head. Follow them to that bright one, his heart, then down to the four that make his legs." Sarah followed his guidance, the unfamiliar constellation gradually taking shape in her perception. "I see it," she said with wonder, the ancient Comanche image suddenly as clear as the classical patterns she had learned in her father's library. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes, Lucas pointing out other native constellations. The teepee, the council fire, the racing horses, each telling stories of his mother's people and their understanding of the world. The shared moment created yet another bridge between their different backgrounds, another layer of connection in their evolving relationship. When they finally returned to the cabin's warmth, something had subtly shifted between them. The simple act of sharing perspectives on the stars had opened a deeper level of understanding that transcended their immediate circumstances. They were no longer merely survival partners, but two people discovering unexpected common ground across vast cultural divides. As they prepared for sleep, Lucas on his bedroll near the fire, Sarah on the bed with Daniel, their normal routine carried new meaning. The respectful distance Lucas maintained, his unfailing consideration for her comfort and privacy, his genuine interest in her thoughts and experiences, all spoke to a character shaped by navigating between worlds while maintaining inner integrity. Sarah found herself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought this particular man to her door when all hope seemed lost. Had Thomas survived, they might have eventually met Lucas as a passing trader, exchanged basic pleasantries, perhaps even traded for supplies. But the depth of understanding that had developed through their shared crisis would never have emerged within the normal boundaries of frontier society. As she drifted towards sleep, Sarah realized that something unprecedented had occurred during their snowbound days together. A connection that defied conventional categories of friendship, professional, obligation, or romantic attachment. They had seen each other's true character revealed in extremity, witnessed each other's strengths and vulnerabilities without pretense, and found unexpected resonance despite their vastly different origins. What would happen when they eventually reached Clearwater? The question lingered in her mind as consciousness faded. The social structures that had been temporarily suspended by crisis would reassert themselves. The easy equality of their cabin existence would inevitably transform into something more constrained, more formal, more defined by others' expectations. For now, however, their small world remained intact, a space created by necessity but evolving into something neither could have anticipated. Outside, the Wyoming winter maintained its grip on the landscape, a vast white expanse beneath an infinite starry sky. Inside, two people from different worlds continued their unlikely journey toward mutual understanding. One conversation, one shared experience, one revealed truth at a time. In the quiet hours before dawn, as Lucas tended the fire and checked on his charges, he found himself contemplating Sarah Reynolds with growing admiration. Her resilience in the face of devastating loss, her openness to unfamiliar perspectives, her quick intelligence and natural dignity, all revealed a woman of exceptional character who defied easy categorization. Most frontier women he encountered viewed him through the lens of prejudice, seeing only his Comanche heritage and responding with fear or disdain. Eastern women like Sarah typically brought different but equally limiting preconceptions regarding him as an exotic curiosity or a potential threat to civilized norms. Yet Sarah had moved beyond initial surprise to genuine interest and respect, seeing him as an individual rather than a representative of category or type. In the crucible of their shared crisis, something authentic had emerged between them, a connection based on recognition of each other's essential humanity rather than social position or background. What that might mean for their future remained uncertain, a question for the days ahead, when the wider world would once again impose its definitions and demands. For now, it was enough that in this remote cabin, buried in winter's embrace, two people had discovered common ground neither had anticipated finding. The fifth day since Lucas's arrival dawned with the promise of continued clear weather. The temperature had risen slightly, causing the top layer of snow to soften during daylight hours before freezing again at night. These conditions, while still challenging, offered the first realistic opportunity to consider the journey to clear water. Lucas had spent the previous day scouting the surrounding area, checking the trail conditions and ensuring Thunder was ready for the additional burden of passengers. Sarah had continued to gain strength, moving around the cabin with increasing confidence and taking on more active care of Daniel, whose growth seemed to accelerate daily under their combined attention. "I believe we could attempt the journey. Tomorrow," Lucas announced as they shared breakfast, "the snow has settled enough to make travel possible, though slow. If we leave at first light, we can reach Clearwater by nightfall." Sarah nodded, accepting his assessment while feeling a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. The prospect of reaching a settlement with proper provisions, additional medical care, and the company of other women was undeniably appealing. Yet the thought of leaving their isolated haven, where social boundaries had been temporarily suspended, brought unexpected reluctance. "What should I bring?" she asked, focusing on practical matters rather than her conflicted emotions. "Very little," Lucas advised. "Thunder will carry you and Daniel, along with essential supplies. Anything else can be retrieved later when weather permits a return journey with proper transportation." He didn't mention the possibility that she might never return to this cabin with its bittersweet memories. Thomas's final days, Daniel's precarious birth, her brush with death, and the unexpected connection that had developed between her and Lucas. The unspoken understanding of all these possibilities hung in the air between them. "We should prepare warm wrappings for Daniel," Lucas continued. "I'll fashion a carrier that will keep him secure against your body during the ride while allowing you to nurse him when necessary." "I still have some of Thomas's shirts," Sarah offered. "The material is soft but sturdy. Would that help?" Lucas nodded. "Perfect. I'll also create windbreaks from the buffalo hide I carry. The journey will be cold, but we'll stop regularly to warm ourselves." They spent the day in purposeful preparation, working together with the easy coordination they had developed over their days of shared survival. Lucas fashioned an ingenious carrier for Daniel, using Thomas's shirts reinforced with leather strips. From his supplies, Sarah gathered the few personal items she couldn't bear to leave behind: her wedding ring, Thomas's pocket watch, a small portrait of her parents, the Bible that had recorded their marriage and Daniel's birth. "What happens in Clearwater?" Sarah asked as they worked, finally voicing the question that had lingered unspoken. "For Daniel and me, I mean." Lucas looked up from where he was packing supplies, understanding the deeper concerns behind her question. "Jack Porter and his wife, Emma, own the trading post. They have rooms above the store where travelers sometimes stay. They're good people, fair-minded and generous. They'll welcome you while you decide your next steps." "And you?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. "What will you do?" Lucas's hands stilled momentarily. "I have deliveries waiting in Fort Laramie that were delayed by the storm. Once I know you and Daniel are safely settled, I should continue my trading route." The practical answer revealed little of his own feelings about their imminent separation. Had their intense days together been merely an extraordinary circumstance to him, a rescue obligation now nearing completion? Or did he share her sense that something significant had formed between them, something worth exploring beyond crisis? How long would such a journey take, she asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than invested in his answer. 3 weeks, perhaps 4, depending on conditions, Lucas replied. I typically return to Clearwater between expeditions to resupply and rest. The knowledge that he would return offered some comfort, though Sarah knew their relationship would necessarily change once they entered the social structure of a frontier town. The equality and openness they had established in isolation would be difficult to maintain against community expectations and prejudices. That evening, their last in the cabin, carried a bittersweet quality. They shared a meal of rabbit stew, played a final game of checkers, and discussed the journey ahead with practical focus. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation ran currents of unspoken significance, appreciation for what they had shared, uncertainty about what awaited them, reluctance to end this unexpected interlude. Sleep well, Lucas said as they prepared for rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. Sarah nodded, settling into the bed with Daniel nestled beside her. Thank you, she said quietly. Not just for tomorrow, but for everything since you arrived. I won't forget it. Lucas held her gaze for a moment longer than usual, something unspoken in his dark eyes. Nor will I, he replied simply before turning to his bedroll. Morning arrived with bitter cold but clear skies. They moved with efficient purpose, consuming a hearty breakfast before bundling up against the elements. Lucas had prepared thunder with extra blankets secured across the saddle, creating the most comfortable seat possible for Sarah and Daniel. Sarah found herself lingering as they prepared to leave, taking a final look around the cabin that contained so many pivotal moments of her life: her marriage bed, her child's birthplace, her husband's final breaths, and the unexpected sanctuary where she had found new strength and connection. We can return for your belongings when the trail's clear. Fully, Lucas assured her, misinterpreting her hesitation as concern for material possessions. It's not that, Sarah replied softly. Just memories. Lucas nodded in understanding. The important ones travel with us. The simple wisdom of his observation steadied her. With Daniel secured in the carrier against her chest, Sarah allowed Lucas to help her mount Thunder. The stallion stood patiently, seeming to understand the importance of his role in carrying such precious cargo. With a final look at the cabin, they set off into the vast white landscape. Lucas led Thunder by the reins, setting a careful pace. Through the deep snow, the morning sun cast long blue shadows across the pristine drifts, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath boots and hooves, the occasional soft nickering of thunder, and Daniel's contented noises from his warm nest against Sarah's body. They traveled steadily through the morning, Lucas choosing the path of least resistance while maintaining their general direction toward Clearwater. Occasionally, he pointed out landmarks or signs of wildlife. A fox's delicate tracks crossing their path, a distant herd of elk moving across a hillside, a hawk circling overhead against the crystal blue sky. At midday, they stopped in the shelter of a pine grove. Lucas quickly built a small fire, melting snow for drinking water and warming their hands. Sarah nursed Daniel, while Lucas prepared a simple meal of jerky and dried fruit. The routine of caring for her son while sharing food with Lucas had become comfortably familiar, making this rest feel momentarily like an extension of their cabin life rather than a journey toward change. "How are you faring?" Lucas asked, studying her face for signs of fatigue. "Well enough," Sarah assured him. "Better than I expected. Daniel seems content with the motion. It may even be helping him sleep." Lucas nodded, pleased with their progress. "We're making good time. The snow is firmer than I anticipated." As they prepared to continue their journey, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave the small sanctuary they had created. Each step toward Clearwater felt like movement toward an uncertain future, where the connection they had formed might not survive the pressures of community expectations. The afternoon brought gradual changes to the landscape. More frequent, signs of human presence, occasional distant smoke from chimneys, paths broken through the snow by hunters or travelers. They were approaching the orbit of civilization, leaving behind the pristine isolation that had shaped their relationship. "Tell me about Clearwater," Sarah requested as they continued. "What kind of settlement is it?" "Small but growing," Lucas replied. "Perhaps 40 permanent structures now, with more being built each season. The trading post is the center of everything. There's a smithy, a small church, a schoolhouse, though currently without a teacher, and various homes and businesses. Typical frontier mix of people, former soldiers, failed gold prospectors, adventurous Easterners like yourself." "And how do they regard you?" Sarah asked, the question emerging more directly than she had intended. Lucas was silent for several paces before answering. "It varies," he said finally. "Jack Porter and a few others judge a man by his actions rather than his parentage. Others maintain their prejudices regardless of evidence to the contrary. Most fall somewhere between, willing to trade with me, grateful for news I bring from distant settlements, but keeping a certain distance." The honest assessment carried no self-pity, just a clear-eyed recognition of reality. Sarah found herself feeling protective indignation on his behalf, though she knew her own background had hardly prepared her to understand the complexities of his position. "And a white woman traveling with you? How will they view that?" The question was bold but necessary. She needed to prepare herself for whatever reception awaited them. "With curiosity, certainly," Lucas acknowledged. "Perhaps suspicion until they understand the circumstances. Jack and Emma will support you, and once the full story spreads, most decent folks will recognize the necessity of our arrangement." "And the less decent ones?" Sarah pressed. Lucas's expression hardened slightly. "Every frontier settlement has its share of narrow minds and loose tongues. Their opinions matter less than your safety and Daniel's welfare." The protective undertone in his response warmed Sarah despite the chill air. Whatever complex feelings might exist between them, Lucas's commitment to her and Daniel's well-being remained unwavering. As afternoon waned toward evening, the outlines of Clearwater finally appeared on the horizon. Scattered buildings whose windows glowed with lamplight against the gathering dusk. Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken at the sight. After days of isolation, the prospect of human community seemed simultaneously inviting and overwhelming. "We'll reach the trading post first," Lucas explained. "Jack and Emma live above the store. They'll likely offer you shelter until more permanent arrangements can be made." The words, "more permanent arrangements," hung in the air between them, a reminder that their extraordinary partnership had always been temporary, a crisis response rather than a sustainable situation. Yet Sarah couldn't help wondering what alternative arrangements might be possible if social constraints were different. Their approach to the settlement didn't go unnoticed. Even before they reached the first buildings, a figure emerged from the trading post, shading his eyes against the snow's glare to observe their progress. Within moments, others appeared from nearby structures, their interest piqued by travelers arriving in deep winter. "Lucas!" called the man who had first spotted them, a sturdy, bearded figure in practical frontier clothing. "Wasn't sure we'd see you alive after that blizzard." "Takes more than weather to stop me, Jack," Lucas called back with a hint of wry humor in his voice. As they drew closer, he added more quietly to Sarah, "Jack Porter, the trading post owner I mentioned." They reached the cleared area in front of the trading post, where several townsfolk had gathered, curiosity evident in their expressions as they observed the unusual party. Lucas leading Thunder, who carried a clearly exhausted woman, cradling what appeared to be an infant. "Who've we got here?" Jack asked, his gaze moving from Lucas to Sarah and the bundle secured against her chest. Mrs. Sarah Reynolds and her son Daniel. Lucas introduced them formally. Their cabin is 15 miles northwest. Her husband died shortly before the storm. Jack's expression immediately softened. Frontier pragmatism, recognizing tragedy as an expected element of their harsh existence. Mrs. Reynolds, welcome to Clearwater. I'm Jack Porter. This is my wife, Emma. A sturdy woman with kind eyes had joined him, her practical clothing and capable hands marking her as someone accustomed to frontier demands. "Come inside, dear," she said, immediately taking charge. "You must be frozen half to death, and that baby needs warming." As Lucas helped Sarah dismount, her legs buckled slightly from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. He caught her elbow, steadying her with a supportive grip that didn't escape the notice of several onlookers. The small gesture of familiarity between them, a white woman and a half-Comanche man, caused subtle reactions among the gathered residents. Raised eyebrows, exchanged glances, slight frowns from some, thoughtful observation from others. "Lucas found us when we were hours from death," Sarah explained, her voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "He brought medicine, food, and firewood when we had nothing. Daniel and I owe him our lives." The direct acknowledgement of their debt to Lucas appeared to ease some tensions, while raising new questions in other faces. Sarah lifted her chin slightly, meeting the curious stares with quiet dignity. She would not apologize for accepting help that had saved her child, regardless of who had provided it. Emma Porter broke the momentary awkwardness with practical efficiency. "Well, you're safe now, and that's what matters. We have a room ready for travelers that will do nicely for you and the little one. Lucas, you'll stay for supper at least. You look half-starved yourself." "I need to see to Thunder first," Lucas replied. "He's carried a heavy burden through difficult conditions." "Of course," Jack agreed. "Use the stable behind the store. There's fresh hay and grain. Join us when you're done." As Lucas led Thunder toward the stable, Sarah found herself guided into the trading post by Emma's gentle but firm hand. The sudden transition from the vast white silence of their journey to the warm, bustling interior of the store was jarring. Merchandise filled shelves along the walls. Tools, fabric, preserved foods, ammunition, clothing, and countless other necessities of frontier life. A large stove dominated the center of the room, surrounded by several chairs, where men often gathered to exchange news and stories. Several people had followed them inside, their curious gazes following Sarah as Emma led her toward a staircase. At the back of the store, "Folks, give the poor woman some space," Emma chided the onlookers. "She's exhausted from her journey and needs rest, not gawking." The firm but good-natured reprimand dispersed most of the curious observers, though Sarah could hear their whispered speculation as she climbed the stairs to the porter's living quarters above. The small apartment was simple but comfortable, with carved wooden furniture, colorful quilts, and the unmistakable touches of a woman who had created home amid frontier challenges. Emma showed her to a small bedroom off the main living area. "This is our guest room," she explained. "Not fancy, but clean and warm. The washroom is through that door. I'll bring hot water for you and the baby." "Thank you," Sarah said sincerely, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from isolation to community. "You're very kind to take us in." "Nonsense," Emma replied briskly. "It's what neighbors do in these parts. Now, let me see that little one." With practiced hands, she helped Sarah unwrap Daniel from his traveling bundle. The infant blinked at the unfamiliar surroundings, but showed no distress, his resilience continuing to impress Sarah. "My word, he's a strong one," Emma observed, gently examining the baby. "Born during the storm," Lucas said. "Yes," Sarah confirmed. 6 days before he found us. My husband helped with the delivery, but then fell ill himself." Emma's expression conveyed deep sympathy without pity, the response of a woman who understood frontier hardships firsthand. "You've endured more than most could bear," she said simply. "But you're not alone anymore. Clearwater takes care of its own." The simple reassurance brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. After days of isolation and struggle, the prospect of community support was overwhelming. Yet even as she gratefully accepted Emma's kindness, Sarah found herself glancing toward the window, wondering where Lucas was and what role he would play in their lives now that the immediate crisis had passed. Emma noticed the glance, and her expression grew thoughtful. "Lucas Blackwood is a good man," she said carefully, "despite what some here might think. Jack and I have known him for years, always fair in his dealings, generous when others are in need. We're glad he found you when he did." The deliberate declaration of support for Lucas wasn't lost on Sarah. Emma was subtly indicating her own position on the social divisions that separated someone of mixed heritage from full acceptance, while gauging Sarah's attitude toward their rescuer. "I owe him everything," Sarah replied simply. "Without his knowledge and skills, Daniel and I wouldn't have survived another day." Emma nodded, satisfied with the response. "Rest now. I'll bring food up shortly. Lucas typically takes his meals with us when he's in town, so you'll see him again soon." Left alone with Daniel, Sarah sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's journey and the abrupt transition from their isolated existence to this busy settlement. The comfortable room with its clean linens and sturdy furniture represented safety and stability, yet she found herself strangely missing the rough simplicity of the cabin where she and Lucas had created their temporary haven. As she nursed Daniel and prepared him for sleep in the small crib Emma had provided, Sarah contemplated the complex reality they now faced. In Clearwater, she was no longer simply Sarah, companion in survival to Lucas. She had become Mrs. Reynolds, the widowed newcomer, with an infant, an object of curiosity, potential charity, and inevitable speculation. Lucas had transformed from her equal partner in crisis to a peripheral figure whose connection to her would be judged by community standards neither of them had created. The sound of voices drifting up from below indicated Lucas had returned from tending thunder. Sarah found herself listening intently, distinguishing his low, measured tones among the others, finding unexpected comfort in the familiar sound. Whatever challenges awaited them in this new environment, the connection they had formed remained real. A foundation built through extraordinary circumstances that had revealed their true characters to each other in ways ordinary acquaintance never could. As she prepared to join the others for the evening meal, Sarah squared her shoulders and lifted her chin slightly. She would face Clearwater's curious gazes and inevitable judgments with the same strength that had carried her through blizzard, childbirth, and bereavement. And she would acknowledge her debt to Lucas without shame or hesitation, regardless of others' opinions. Some battles couldn't be won immediately, but they could be fought with quiet dignity and persistent truth. The journey from isolation to community had just begun, bringing new challenges that would test both her resilience and the unexpected bond formed between a Boston teacher and a Half-Comanche trader during Wyoming's cruelest winter storm. Sarah's first week in Clearwater passed in a blur of new faces and adjustments. Emma Porter proved an invaluable guide to settlement life, introducing her to key community members and helping her establish a daily routine. Daniel thrived under the combined attention of several experienced mothers who offered advice and assistance, his strength and alertness increasing visibly each day. The Porter's generosity extended beyond basic shelter. Jack had helped Sarah send letters east to her parents, explaining her widowhood and current circumstances. Emma had organized a collection of essential items from various households, baby clothes, feminine necessities, and practical household goods that would serve when Sarah established more permanent quarters. Throughout this period of transition, Lucas maintained a respectful distance. He visited daily, inquiring after Sarah and Daniel's welfare, but always in the public setting of the trading post with others present. Their conversations remained brief and formal, a stark contrast to the intimate discussions they had shared. During their isolated days in the cabin, Sarah understood the necessity of this change, yet found herself missing their unguarded exchanges. In Clearwater, Lucas had reverted to his public persona, the capable trader respected for his skills, but held apart by his mixed heritage. The man who had shared his mother's star stories and taught her Comanche words seemed to have disappeared behind this careful facade. On the 8th day after their arrival, Sarah encountered Lucas alone for the first time since leaving the cabin. She had walked to the stable behind the trading post, Daniel securely bundled against her chest, hoping the infant might enjoy watching the horses. She found Lucas grooming Thunder, preparing for his departure to Fort Laramie. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked, startled by the immediacy of his plans, though she had known this moment would come. Lucas looked up, surprise and something warmer flickering in his eyes, before his expression resumed its public neutrality. "Yes. The trails south have cleared enough for safe passage. I've delayed my deliveries too long already." Sarah nodded, understanding the practical necessity while feeling an unexpected sense of loss. "Of course. Your business requires attention." An awkward silence fell between them, so unlike the comfortable quiet they had often shared in the cabin. Here, in this settlement built on strict social hierarchies, they had become uncertain of their proper roles with each other. "How are you settling in?" Lucas finally asked, his hands continuing their methodical work on Thunder's coat. "Everyone has been kind," Sarah replied carefully. "The Porters especially. Emma has introduced me to most of the women, and Jack has helped arrange for a small cabin at the edge of town that will be available next month." "That's good news," Lucas said, genuine warmth breaking through his reserve. "You and Daniel deserve a secure home. It will need considerable work before it's truly habitable," Sarah continued. "The previous owner left last autumn, and the winter weather has caused some damage. But the structure is sound, and the price is within my means, especially if I can establish a small school as Jack has suggested." Lucas smiled slightly. "You would make an excellent teacher. Clearwater's children would benefit greatly from your knowledge." The simple affirmation of her capabilities touched Sarah deeply, unlike most men of her acquaintance who viewed female education as ornamental at best. Lucas had consistently respected her intelligence and learning. "I wanted to thank you," she said impulsively, "for everything you've done, not just the rescue, but the respect you've shown me throughout our acquaintance. It's been rare in my experience." Lucas's hands stilled on Thunder's flank, his eyes meeting hers directly for the first time in days. "You earned my respect with your courage and determination, Sarah. Few would have managed what you did, keeping your child alive against such odds, facing death with such dignity." The use of her given name, avoided in public since their arrival, created a momentary bridge back to their shared experience. For a fleeting instant, they were again the people who had survived together, rather than the frontier widow and half-Comanche trader that Clearwater society defined them to be. The moment was shattered by the stable door swinging open, admitting Reverend Silas Montgomery, Clearwater's newly arrived minister. His tall, thin figure and severe expression created an immediate change in the atmosphere. "Mrs. Reynolds," he acknowledged with a nod before turning a considerably cooler gaze toward Lucas. "Mr. Blackwood." "Reverend," they both responded, their tones neutral. "I was hoping to speak with you, Mrs. Reynolds," Montgomery continued, pointedly ignoring Lucas's presence, "about your situation and how the church might assist you." "That's very kind," Sarah replied carefully, "but the Porters have been most generous, and my needs are well met for the moment." the minister's thin lips pressed together in what might have been a smile. "I was thinking more of spiritual guidance than material assistance. Frontier life presents many temptations for a woman alone. The church provides crucial moral structure during such vulnerable periods." The implication behind his words was unmistakable, his quick glance toward Lucas making clear the specific temptation he suspected. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Adieu, not from embarrassment, but from indignation at the baseless insinuation. "Mr. Blackwood saved my life and my son's life during the worst blizzard in recent memory," she stated firmly. "Any interaction between us has been entirely proper." "Of course," Montgomery responded smoothly. "I meant no offense. However, appearances matter greatly in a small community. I've heard certain concerns expressed about the nature of your time together in that isolated cabin." Lucas straightened to his full height, his expression controlled but tension evident in his posture. "If you have questions about my conduct, Reverend, I suggest you direct them to me rather than implying impropriety to Mrs. Reynolds." Montgomery's gaze cooled further. "I believe Mrs. Reynolds, as a recent widow and newcomer to our community, deserves to understand how certain associations might affect her standing here. I speak only out of concern for her welfare and that of her infant son." The conversation had rapidly become a power struggle with Sarah caught in the middle. She recognized that her response would establish important precedents for her position. "In Clearwater society, I appreciate concern for my welfare," she said carefully, "but I make my own judgments about character. Mr. Blackwood has conducted himself with absolute honor in all our interactions." Montgomery's expression suggested he remained unconvinced. "The Lord's grace extends to all his children, even those of mixed heritage. However, wisdom dictates prudent boundaries, especially where impressionable young minds are concerned." He gestured toward Daniel. "A boy needs proper Christian influences as he grows." The implication that Lucas represented an improper or harmful influence because of his Comanche heritage ignited a protective anger in Sarah. Before she could respond, however, the stable door opened again to admit Jack Porter. "Thought I might find you here," he said to Sarah before acknowledging the others. "Reverend Lucas." Sensing the tension, Jack's shrewd gaze moved between them. "Everything all right?" "Perfectly fine," Montgomery replied smoothly. "I was just offering Mrs. Reynolds the church's support in her difficult circumstances." "Sarah's got plenty of support," Jack stated firmly. "The whole town's looking out for her and the baby." His deliberate use of Sarah's first name and his positioning beside her created a clear statement of alliance. Jack Porter's standing as Clearwater's most established businessman carried significant weight, even with the new minister. "Indeed," Montgomery conceded. "Well, I should continue my calls. Mrs. Reynolds, the Sunday service begins at 10. I hope you'll join us." After his departure, an uncomfortable silence settled over the stable. Jack glanced at Lucas, who had resumed, grooming thunder with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "Reverend's new," Jack commented, still finding his footing. "He made his position quite clear," Lucas replied, his tone neutral, but with an undercurrent of resignation that suggested he'd encountered such attitudes many times before. "Some folks talk more than they think," Jack said with a shrug. "Emma sent me to invite you both to supper. Last meal before you head out tomorrow, Lucas." The invitation normalized their connection, implicitly countering Montgomery's suggestion of impropriety. Sarah felt a rush of gratitude for the Porter's straightforward acceptance of her relationship with Lucas, whatever its nature might be. "I'd be honored," Lucas replied, his expression lightening slightly. That evening's meal in the Porter's comfortable apartment above the trading post carried subtle currents beneath its surface cordiality. Emma had invited several other guests. The blacksmith Howard Miller and his wife Beth, who had been particularly welcoming to Sarah, and Dr. William Calloway, Clearwater's newly arrived physician. The conversation flowed easily around local concerns, weather predictions, and news from distant settlements that Lucas had received via travelers before the blizzard. Sarah noticed how skillfully Jack and Emma integrated Lucas into the social exchange, treating his observations with the same respect accorded any other guest. It was clearly a deliberate strategy they had developed over time, normalizing his presence by example rather than confrontation. Dr. Calloway proved especially interested in Lucas's knowledge of native medicinal practices. "I've read accounts suggesting some tribes have effective treatments for ailments that often resist our conventional approaches," he commented. "Particularly interesting work being done with willow bark derivatives for inflammation. My mother was known for her healing skills," Lucas acknowledged cautiously, seeming to test whether the doctor's interest was genuine or merely patronizing. "She used willow bark extensively, but combined with other herbs that enhanced its effectiveness." "I'd value learning more before you depart," Calloway replied with evident sincerity. "Medicine benefits from many perspectives in my experience. This unexpected alliance, the Eastern-trained doctor seeking knowledge from indigenous traditions, created a subtle shift in the evening's dynamic. If the community's medical authority could openly acknowledge value in Lucas's heritage, it undermined the rigid distinctions others sought to maintain. The conversation had progressed to plans for spring planting when a knock at the door interrupted their meal. Emma opened it to reveal Silas Montgomery, accompanied by Harold Jenkins, a cattle rancher whose spread lay several miles outside town and who served as head of Clearwater's informal town council. "Forgive the intrusion," Montgomery began, though his tone suggested he felt fully justified in the interruption. "But a matter has arisen that requires immediate attention." Jack rose from the table. "What kind of matter, Harold?" Jenkins, a heavyset man with a perpetually florid complexion, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "There's been talk, Jack, concerning Mrs. Reynolds and her situation." Emma stepped forward protectively. "Sarah is our guest, Harold. Any talk about her is idle gossip, unworthy of council attention." "Ordinarily, I'd agree," Jenkins replied, "but this involves community standards and proper appearances. The council has convened an emergency session at the meeting hall. We request Mrs. Reynolds' presence." His gaze shifted to Lucas. "Yours as well, Blackwood." The summons carried an ominous tone that silenced the dinner party. Sarah felt a cold knot forming in her stomach, remembering Montgomery's earlier insinuations about temptations and proper influences. "What exactly is this about?" Jack demanded, his normally affable manner hardening. "It's best discussed in proper forum," Montgomery interjected smoothly. "The council merely wishes to address concerns about arrangements made during the recent crisis and ensure appropriate boundaries moving forward." The careful phrasing didn't disguise the implicit accusation. Someone in Clearwater, likely Montgomery himself, had raised questions about Sarah and Lucas's time alone together, transforming a survival partnership into a potential scandal. "This is ridiculous," Emma stated flatly. They were caught in a blizzard. Lucas saved her life and the baby's. What arrangements could possibly require council review? "That's what we intend to determine," Jenkins replied, his discomfort with his role evident, but his determination unchanged. In 1 hour at the meeting hall, after they departed, the dinner party dissolved in concerned discussion. Dr. Calloway offered to watch Daniel during the meeting, while Beth Miller insisted on accompanying Sarah as support. Jack and Emma exchanged knowing glances that suggested they had anticipated something like this, though perhaps not so soon. Throughout the commotion, Lucas remained silent, his expression unreadable. Only when they prepared to leave for the meeting did he speak privately to Sarah. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "This is exactly what I hoped to prevent by maintaining distance since our arrival." "You have nothing to apologize for," Sarah replied, firmly. "We did nothing wrong." Lucas's expression reflected a weary resignation. In frontier settlements, perception often matters more than reality. "Your reputation, my reputation, is built on truth," Sarah interrupted. "And the truth is that you saved us when no one else could or would. I won't deny that to satisfy small minds or petty prejudices." Her unwavering support visibly affected Lucas, though he schooled his features quickly. "The Council holds significant power here. Their decisions affect your future in Clearwater. Choose your battles carefully, Sarah." "Some principles aren't negotiable," she replied simply. The meeting hall, a plain structure that served as church, schoolroom, and community gathering space, was nearly full when they arrived. It seemed most of Clearwater's adult population had assembled, their expressions ranging from curiosity to grim determination. At the front of the room, a table had been arranged where Harold Jenkins, Reverend Montgomery, and 3 other men Sarah recognized as prominent citizens sat in judgment-like formation. Jack Porter led their small group to seats near the front, deliberately positioning Sarah between Emma and Beth Miller, while he and Lucas took places directly behind them. The strategic arrangement presented Sarah as integrated into the community's respectable female circle, while maintaining proper distance from Lucas, a visual statement against the whispered accusations. "We've called this meeting," Jenkins began once everyone had settled, "to address a matter of community concern. Information has reached us regarding the exact nature of Mrs. Reynolds' rescue and subsequent situation that requires public clarification." Montgomery leaned forward, his expression severe. "Mrs. Reynolds, is it true that you and Mr. Blackwood spent 6 days and nights alone together in your cabin before traveling to Clearwater?" The blunt question, delivered in a tone that suggested moral transgression, sent a ripple of murmurs through the gathered crowd. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame, but indignation at the implied impropriety. "Mr. Blackwood saved my life and my son's life during the worst blizzard in recent memory," she replied evenly. "We would have frozen to death without his intervention." "That doesn't answer the question, Mrs. Reynolds," Montgomery pressed. "Did you, a recently widowed woman, share accommodations unsupervised with Mr. Blackwood for nearly a week?" Before Sarah could respond, Lucas stood. "I found Mrs. Reynolds suffering from hypothermia and post-childbirth infection, with her infant son equally at risk. As the only capable adult present, I was obligated to remain until her condition stabilized and travel became possible. I maintained appropriate conduct throughout." "No one questions your medical intervention, Blackwood," Jenkins interjected. "It's the extended cohabitation that concerns us." Sarah straightened her spine, finding her voice. "The blizzard made departure impossible. We were snowbound with drifts higher than the door. Mr. Blackwood behaved with absolute propriety at all times, maintaining appropriate distance except when care required otherwise." Despite her clear explanation, skeptical expressions remained on several faces. Beth Miller's sister-in-law, Meredith Wilson, a woman known for her rigid views on propriety, spoke up from her seat. "Even with the purest intentions, appearances matter. The reputation of our growing community cannot withstand scandal." Jenkins raised his hands, calming the increasing murmurs. "No one is suggesting impropriety occurred," he clarified, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But we must consider how this situation appears, especially as news travels to neighboring settlements." "What exactly is being suggested?" Emma demanded, her practical nature cutting through the veiled implications. Montgomery cleared his throat. The council has deliberated and believes there is only one solution that preserves Mrs. Reynolds's reputation and the community's moral standing. He paused significantly. Marriage. The single word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Sarah felt as though the floor had suddenly tilted beneath her feet. Marriage, she repeated incredulously. You're suggesting I should marry because of unfounded gossip about a situation where survival was the only consideration? Not just any marriage, Jenkins clarified, looking uncomfortable but determined. Given the circumstances, the council believes you should marry Mr. Blackwood to resolve the appearance of impropriety. A stunned silence fell over the room. Lucas had gone completely rigid, his eyes fixed on some middle distance, revealing nothing of his thoughts on this extraordinary proposal. This is outrageous, Emma declared, breaking the silence. You men with your notions of propriety, have you considered what you're actually proposing? Forcing a half-Comanche man to marry a white widow with a newborn infant? The very thing most of you whisper against when you think no one's listening. Her blunt assessment exposed the hypocrisy underlying the council's solution. They would condemn any natural development of the relationship between Sarah and Lucas based on racial differences, yet would mandate marriage between them to avoid scandal. The situation is unique, Jenkins acknowledged uncomfortably, but the alternative is worse. Already rumors have reached Wilson's Landing about the widow rescued by the Indian trader. Questions are being asked that could damage both Mrs. Reynolds's standing and our community's reputation. Sarah found her voice, anger cutting through shock. So to prevent gossip about something that never happened, you would force two people into a lifetime commitment against their will. Not against their will necessarily, Montgomery interjected smoothly. Perhaps Mr. Blackwood would like to express his thoughts on the matter. All eyes turned to Lucas, who had remained silent through the exchange. He stepped forward, his composure intact, though Sarah could sense the tightly controlled anger beneath his calm exterior. I have the highest respect for Mrs. Reynolds, he stated carefully. Her courage during our ordeal was remarkable, but marriage is a serious commitment that should result from mutual choice, not community pressure. His diplomatic response, neither accepting nor outright rejecting the proposal, seemed to frustrate the council members who had clearly expected either immediate compliance or angry refusal. There are practical benefits to consider, another council member suggested. Mrs. Reynolds needs establishment and support for herself and her child. Mr. Blackwood has a cabin, but lacks family. Arrangements of convenience are not uncommon on the frontier. And what of children? Emma challenged bluntly. Are you suggesting Mrs. Reynolds should bear mixed-blood children when most of you wouldn't allow your own to play with such offspring? Or would this be a marriage in name only? Another hypocrisy to maintain appearances. The uncomfortable shifting among several council members revealed Emma had struck a nerve. The contradiction was becoming increasingly apparent. They would force this marriage to maintain appearances while simultaneously expecting it to remain unconsummated to prevent the complication of mixed-race children. Dr. Calloway, who had entered quietly during the proceedings, now spoke up. As a medical professional, I must object to the council inserting itself into private matters between individuals. Mrs. Reynolds has suffered recent childbirth, bereavement, and near death. Forcing life-altering decisions upon her during this vulnerable period violates both medical ethics and basic human decency. The doctor's professional authority lent weight to his objection, creating visible uncertainty among some council members. Jenkins glanced at Montgomery, who remained determined to press his position. The moral welfare of this community, the minister began, is best served by truth and compassion, not coercion and hypocrisy, Jack Porter interrupted, rising to stand beside Lucas. I've known Lucas Blackwood for 15 years. His character exceeds that of many so-called respectable citizens I've encountered. If Mrs. Reynolds chooses to associate with him, that's her right as a free woman in a free territory. The public support from Clearwater's most established businessmen created a definite shift in the room's atmosphere. Those who had been nodding, along with Montgomery's insinuations, now looked uncertain, weighing their moral judgments against potential conflict with the settlement's economic center. "May I speak?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions the proceedings had provoked. Jenkins nodded, clearly relieved to shift attention away from the growing division among community leaders. Sarah rose, conscious of all eyes upon her. The woman who had faced blizzard, childbirth, and bereavement found herself drawing on reservoirs of strength she hadn't known she possessed before those trials. "I came west with my husband to build a life based on our own choices, rather than others' expectations," she began. "His death hasn't changed my desire for self-determination. I'm deeply grateful for Clearwater's welcome and assistance, but I cannot accept dictates about my personal associations or future decisions." She paused, meeting Montgomery's gaze directly. "My son and I owe our lives to Lucas Blackwood's courage and skills. I will not dishonor that debt by pretending our acquaintance requires community supervision or formal arrangement to be proper. Whatever relationship develops between us will be based on mutual respect and personal choice, not external pressure." A murmur ran through the gathering, some approving, others disapproving, but all recognizing the unmistakable dignity in her stance. Sarah had effectively reclaimed authority over her own narrative, refusing both the role of victim requiring rescue from moral peril and that of obedient newcomer submitting to community judgment. "May I suggest a compromise?" Dr. Calloway proposed into the momentary silence. "Mr. Blackwood departs tomorrow for his trading journey, providing natural separation during which gossip will inevitably find new targets. Upon his return, let individual conscience rather than public decree determine appropriate associations. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reynolds has demonstrated admirable character that deserves our community's full support as she establishes her new life here." The measured proposal offered everyone a dignified path forward. The council could claim their concerns had been addressed through temporary separation, while Sarah and Lucas retained their autonomy to define their own relationship in the future. Jenkins looked relieved at this potential resolution. "That seems reasonable, Reverend." Montgomery's tight expression revealed his dissatisfaction, but he recognized he'd lost this particular battle. "The church remains concerned about proper appearances, but we will pray for wisdom for all involved." As the meeting disbanded, with townspeople already buzzing about the confrontation, Sarah found herself surrounded by supporters. Emma and Jack, the Millers, Dr. Calloway, and several others who had been moved by her dignified self-defense. Lucas stood slightly apart, his expression unreadable to most, though Sarah could detect relief and something warmer in his dark eyes when their gazes briefly met. The council's attempt to control their connection through forced marriage had failed, but the public nature of tonight's proceedings had forever altered how Clearwater would view them. For better or worse, their private bond forged in crisis had become a community matter, subject to ongoing speculation and judgment. What that meant for their future remained uncertain, a question neither could answer amid the commotion of dispersing townspeople and the immediate reality of Lucas's imminent departure. But something significant had been established in that meeting hall. Not just Sarah's refusal to be controlled by others' expectations, but the existence of community members willing to judge Lucas by his character rather than his heritage. It was perhaps a fragile foundation on which to build, but in a frontier territory where survival itself often hung by slender threads, they had learned to value even the most tenuous beginnings of something that might, with care and courage, grow into something stronger. Dawn broke crisp and clear on the morning of Lucas's departure. Sarah stood on the small balcony outside the porter's quarters, Daniel securely nestled against her shoulder, watching as Lucas made final preparations for his journey. Below in the trading post yard, he secured provisions to Thunder's saddle with methodical precision, his movements efficient from years of practice. After the previous night's confrontation at the town meeting, they hadn't found an opportunity for private conversation. The porter's small apartment had filled with supporters, Emma organizing refreshments, while Jack engaged several influential townsmen in pointed discussions about frontier pragmatism versus Eastern sensibilities. By the time the gathering dispersed, exhaustion had claimed Sarah, the emotional toll of the public scrutiny leaving her drained beyond words. Now, as Lucas prepared to leave for his extended trading journey, she felt the weight of unspoken possibilities between them. Last night's forced marriage proposal, though rejected, had brought into open discussion a connection neither had fully acknowledged, even to themselves. Thunder's saddle secured, Lucas glanced up, noticing her on the balcony. He nodded once in greeting, his expression carefully neutral despite the absence of observers at this early hour. Sarah descended the external staircase, Daniel still cradled in one arm. "You're leaving early," she observed, keeping her voice low in the crisp morning air. "Best to reach Parker's Creek by nightfall," Lucas replied, adjusting Thunder's bridle. "The trail south still has difficult sections." "How long will you be gone?" The question carried more significance than its simple words suggested. 4 weeks. If conditions favor me, perhaps 6 if spring storms cause delays. Lucas turned to face her fully, his composure softening slightly. "Jack and Emma will look after you. Dr. Calloway seems like a good man as well." "I'll be fine," Sarah assured, him unconsciously lifting her chin with the same quiet determination that had impressed him during their cabin days. "The small house Jack mentioned should be available by the time you return. Daniel and I will have established our own place by then." Lucas nodded, something like pride flickering in his dark eyes. "You're stronger than most realize, Sarah Reynolds." The use of her full name reminded her of their changed circumstances, no longer isolated survivors depending only on each other, but participants in a community with watchful eyes and rigid expectations. "Last night changed things," she said, quietly, addressing the unspoken tension between them. "The council's proposal was inappropriate, but it forced into open discussion what we've been careful not to acknowledge." Lucas's expression revealed nothing, though his posture tensed slightly. "What would you have me acknowledge, Sarah?" The direct question deserved an equally direct answer. What happened between us during those days in the cabin wasn't merely survival necessity, that we formed a connection neither of us anticipated, that we now face choices about what that connection might become. For a moment, Lucas's carefully maintained reserve cracked, revealing a complex mixture of emotions: longing, uncertainty, and an ingrained wariness born from a lifetime of navigating between hostile worlds. "You know what obstacles would face us," he said finally, his voice low. "Last night was merely a taste of the opposition we'd encounter. Your reputation, Daniel's future, my own standing among both settlers and native people, all would be affected." "I'm aware of the difficulties," Sarah replied steadily. "I'm asking if you believe what exists between us is worth facing them." Thunder stamped impatiently, the sound emphasizing the immediacy of Lucas's departure. The moment stretched between them, laden with possibilities neither had dared examine fully until the council's crude proposal had forced the issue into the open. "I can't answer that question today," Lucas said finally. "Neither should you. We've both experienced extraordinary circumstances that forge connections that might not survive in ordinary life. When I return, if you still wish to explore this question, we'll discuss it with clearer minds." The measured response reflected Lucas's characteristic thoughtfulness, yet Sarah detected something more beneath his careful words, a protective hesitation, born not from indifference, but from genuine concern for her welfare in a community where their association already drew unwelcome scrutiny. "I respect your caution," she said, "but I won't allow others to dictate my heart's choices, Lucas Blackwood." "Not again!" Something in her resolute declaration sparked a response in Lucas's normally guarded expression, a flash of genuine hope, quickly contained but unmistakably present. "Then we have much to discuss when I return," he acknowledged, his tone warmer than it had been throughout their conversation. In a gesture that bridged their public caution and private understanding, Lucas reached out to touch Daniel's small hand where it had escaped his blanket. The infant's tiny fingers curled reflexively around Lucas's weathered index finger, creating a connection that spoke volumes without words. "Stay safe," Sarah said softly, as Lucas gently disengaged from Daniel's grip. "You as well," he replied, with a final nod that contained more meaning than casual observers might detect. Lucas mounted Thunder and guided the stallion toward the main trail leading south from Clearwater. Sarah watched until horse and rider disappeared beyond the settlement's edge, Daniel warm against her chest as the morning sun cast long shadows across the trampled snow. Only when they had vanished from sight did she turn back toward the trading post, aware that a new chapter in their story had begun, one that would unfold not in an isolated crisis, but within the complex social fabric of frontier society. The weeks of Lucas's absence passed more quickly than Sarah had anticipated. Spring arrived with surprising suddenness, transforming the landscape from pristine white to muddy brown, before erupting into delicate green. The busy rhythm of settlement life absorbed Sarah's energy, caring for Daniel, assisting Emma in the trading post, and preparing the small cabin that would become their home. Jack Porter had negotiated favorable terms with the absentee owner, allowing Sarah to take possession with minimal initial payment in exchange for repairs and improvements. The arrangement satisfied both parties. Sarah obtained immediate housing without depleting her meager savings, while the owner's property would be maintained rather than deteriorating further. The cabin itself stood at Clearwater's eastern edge, close enough for convenience, but slightly removed from the settlement center. Its modest dimensions, a main room with small attached bedroom, serviceable fireplace, and sturdy roof, suited Sarah's needs perfectly. The dirt floor would eventually require proper boards, and the single window needed new glass, but the structure itself was sound. Each day after completing her work at the trading post, Sarah walked to the cabin with Daniel, tending to repairs she could manage alone and planning those that would require assistance. Several townsmen had offered help with the heavier work, a gesture Sarah recognized as both neighborly kindness and subtle courtship. With Lucas's absence creating appropriate distance, her status as an attractive young widow had begun to overshadow the controversy of her arrival. 3 weeks into this new routine, Sarah returned to the cabin to find Reverend Montgomery waiting outside her door. His tall figure and somber expression created an immediate tension. Memories of a town meeting still fresh in her mind. "Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted her, his tone formally polite. "I hoped we might speak privately." Sarah adjusted Daniel against her shoulder, studying the minister with cautious neutrality. "I have work to complete before sundown, Reverend, but I can spare a few minutes." She unlocked the cabin door and entered, leaving it open behind her, both as practical necessity for light and as a social precaution against inappropriate speculation. Montgomery followed, remaining near the entrance while Sarah placed Daniel in the cradle Emma had provided. "Your improvements are progressing." "Well," the minister observed, glancing around the partially renovated space, "slowly but steadily." Sarah replied, waiting for him to reveal his true purpose. Montgomery clasped his hands behind his back, his posture stiff. "I've come to express my regret for the manner in which concerns were raised at the town meeting. While the council's intentions were honorable, the public nature of the discussion was perhaps unfortunate." The qualified apology surprised Sarah, though she noted it addressed the method rather than the substance of their objections to her association with Lucas. "I appreciate your acknowledgement," she responded carefully, "though I maintain that my personal arrangements are my own affair." Montgomery's expression tightened slightly. "It is precisely your personal affairs that prompt my visit today, Mrs. Reynolds. News has reached me that causes renewed concern." "What news would that be?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the answer. "Mr. Blackwood is expected to return within days," Montgomery stated flatly. "The question of your continued association remains unresolved, and certain parties in town have expressed renewed interest in the council's original proposal." Sarah set down the hammer she'd been holding, giving the minister her full attention. "The council's proposal was rejected, Reverend, by both parties involved. Circumstances evolve, Mrs. Reynolds. Several prominent citizens believe a proper marriage would still be the most suitable resolution, particularly as you establish yourself in our community." The renewed pressure ignited Sarah's indignation. "Are these the same citizens who ordinarily object to any association between whites and Indians? Their hypocrisy is remarkable." Montgomery's face flushed slightly. "The situation is complex. Your arrival with Mr. Blackwood created impressions that, while perhaps unfounded, nonetheless affect community harmony. A formalized arrangement would resolve these tensions while preserving your reputation." "At the cost of personal truth," Sarah countered. "I won't enter a marriage of convenience to satisfy gossip, Reverend. Whatever relationship develops between Mr. Blackwood and myself will be based on mutual choice, not external pressure." The minister studied her with a mixture of frustration and calculation. "Consider your son's future, Mrs. Reynolds. A boy needs proper influences as he grows. The council could assist you in finding more suitable match among Clearwater's established men. Several have already expressed interest. The implied trade, social acceptance and support in exchange for rejecting Lucas, clarified the real purpose behind Montgomery's visit. The council hadn't abandoned their opposition to her connection with Lucas. They had merely changed tactics from coercion to bribery. Daniel's future is best served by having people of integrity in his life, regardless of their heritage. Sarah replied firmly, "I appreciate the council's concern, but my personal choices remain my own." Montgomery's expression hardened. "Consider carefully, Mrs. Reynolds. Clearwater is a small community. Your position here, this cabin, opportunities to establish your school, even basic provisions, all depend on goodwill that can be variable." The veiled threat was unmistakable, revealing the true nature of frontier freedom, available only to those who conform to community expectations. "Are you suggesting I would be driven out for associating with a man who saved my life?" Sarah asked directly, her voice steady despite her rising anger. "Nothing so dramatic," Montgomery assured her smoothly. "Merely that certain opportunities might become limited. Families might hesitate to send children to a school run by someone whose judgment seems questionable." Before Sarah could respond, a shadow darkened the doorway. Dr. Calloway stood there, his expression suggesting he had heard enough of the conversation to understand its nature. "Ah, Reverend," he said, his tone deliberately light. "Making pastoral calls? Excellent practice. Mrs. Reynolds, I've brought the medicinal preparations we discussed for Daniel's teething. May I come in?" The interruption broke the growing tension, providing Sarah with unexpected support. "Of course, Doctor." The Reverend was just leaving, Montgomery recognized his position had become untenable with a witness present. "Consider our discussion, Mrs. Reynolds. Good day to you both." After his departure, Calloway placed a small package on the table. "I apologize for interrupting, but that conversation seemed to require a third party." "You have excellent timing," Sarah acknowledged gratefully, "though I'm curious what brings you here today." "Two purposes," Calloway replied. "First, the teething remedies I promised. Second, news you should hear, news from a friendly source rather than town gossip." He paused briefly. "Lucas Blackwood returned to Clearwater an hour ago." The simple statement sent an unexpected flutter through Sarah's chest. "Earlier than expected," she observed, striving for a neutral tone. Calloway smiled slightly. "Indeed, and already causing quite a stir by bringing medical supplies I requested from Fort Laramie that several merchants claimed couldn't be obtained until summer." "You asked Lucas for medical supplies?" Sarah questioned, surprised by this collaboration. "I did," Calloway confirmed. "After our dinner conversation, I sent a letter asking if he could procure certain items difficult to obtain through regular channels. He delivered them promptly and at fair cost." The doctor's expression grew more serious. "I tell you this because it represents a choice you may soon face. Some in Clearwater will never accept association between people of different backgrounds. Others judge individuals by their actions rather than heritage. You'll need to decide which perspective guides your own choices." The straightforward assessment reflected the frontier reality more honestly than Montgomery's veiled threats or the council's hypocritical proposal. Clearwater, like any community, contained both prejudice and principle, often existing in the same individuals depending on circumstances. "I've already made that decision," Sarah replied quietly. "Though acting on it may prove challenging," Calloway nodded, understanding the complexity of her position. "You have more allies than you might realize. Emma and Jack, certainly. My wife, and I, when she arrives next month. The Millers and several others who value character above convention." His words offered reassurance that whatever path she chose, Sarah would not face Clearwater's judgment entirely alone. The knowledge strengthened her resolve as she considered Lucas's return and the decisions that lay ahead. After Calloway's departure, Sarah completed her day's work on the cabin with renewed purpose, then gathered Daniel for their return to the porter's quarters. As they approached the trading post, she saw Thunder hitched outside, confirmation of Lucas's arrival that quickened her steps despite her effort to maintain dignified composure. Inside, she found Lucas engaged in conversation with Jack, unloading trade goods on the counter between them. He looked up at her entrance, his normally guarded expression warming briefly before resuming its public neutrality. "Mrs. Reynolds," he acknowledged with a polite nod. "Mr. Blackwood," she returned formally, though a slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Welcome back to Clearwater." Jack glanced between them with knowing eyes. "Lucas was just telling me about his successful journey. Seems he made excellent time on the return trip." "Favorable conditions," Lucas explained, though something in his tone suggested other motivations might have hastened his return. Their public interaction maintained appropriate distance, yet Sarah detected the same undercurrents that had marked their parting conversation. Questions remained unanswered, possibilities unexplored, not from indifference, but from the complexity of their circumstances. That evening, after Daniel had been settled for the night, Sarah stood again on the porter's small balcony, watching the lights of Clearwater dim as the settlement prepared for sleep. A soft footstep behind her revealed Emma's presence. "He asked about you," Emma said without preamble. "Every detail of how you and Daniel have fared these past weeks." Sarah turned, meeting her friend's knowing gaze. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," Emma replied simply. that you've worked tirelessly to establish independence, that you've faced opposition with dignity, that you've created a place for yourself here through your own strength. These observations, offered without embellishment, reflected what Sarah had discovered about herself during Lucas's absence, a resilience she hadn't fully recognized until the crisis and its aftermath had revealed it. The Council hasn't abandoned its opposition, Sarah noted. Reverend Montgomery made that quite clear today. Emma nodded, unsurprised. Some battles can't be won through direct confrontation, Sarah. They require steady persistence that wears away prejudice through consistent example. She paused, thoughtfully. Lucas understands this better than most. It's how he's survived in both worlds without surrendering his integrity in either. The insight illuminated aspects of Lucas's character Sarah had observed, but not fully comprehended. His careful navigation of social boundaries, his measured responses to provocation, his strategic building of alliances across conventional divisions. These weren't merely personal traits, but survival skills developed through a lifetime at the intersection of conflicting worlds. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, the question encompassing far more than immediate plans. Emma's expression softened. "With understanding. That depends on choices you and Lucas make and on how you make them. Clearwater won't change overnight, but it can adapt gradually to relationships that demonstrate their value through time." The practical wisdom offered neither false optimism nor discouraging pessimism, but a realistic assessment of the path ahead, challenging but not impossible for those with sufficient courage and patience. As darkness settled fully over Clearwater, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From Boston schoolteacher to frontier wife, from desperate widow to independent survivor, each transition had revealed capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. The most recent challenge, navigating community judgment while honoring her own heart, would require all the strength she had discovered through adversity. Tomorrow would bring decisions that would shape her future, and Daniel's. Lucas would call at the cabin to discuss repairs requiring his expertise, a practical reason for meeting that would satisfy public propriety while allowing private conversation about matters of greater significance. Together they would determine whether the connection forged in crisis could evolve into something sustainable beyond extraordinary circumstances, not through grand declarations or defiant gestures, but through the steady building of shared purpose that might eventually transform not only their own lives, but the community around them. For tonight, it was enough to know that possibilities existed beyond conventional expectations. The frontier that had taken so much from Sarah, her husband, her security, nearly her life, had also given unexpected gifts, newfound strength, deeper understanding of herself, and a connection with a man whose character had been revealed. Through actions rather than words, whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, Sarah would face them with the same quiet determination that had carried her through blizzard, bereavement, and social pressure. She had discovered what truly mattered: integrity, courage, and the freedom to choose her own path, despite others' judgments. In that discovery lay the foundation for whatever future she and Lucas might build, whether together or apart. The forced marriage proposal had failed, but the possibility of a chosen connection remained, one based not on others' expectations, but on mutual respect and shared values that transcended the boundaries frontier society sought to maintain. As she turned to go inside, Sarah cast a final glance toward the small cabin at Clearwater's edge, where tomorrow's conversation would determine much about her future. The structure stood solid against the darkness, a testament to survival and new beginnings, an apt symbol for the life she was building from the remnants of dreams that had led her west and the unexpected bond formed during Wyoming's cruelest winter storm. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.